Oh, yes.
Looking at things after I presented.
You are totally fine. So this is like Thursday, but it's here, so. This is the intro, then it goes a little bit to the next page.
Okay,
And then we'll go back over here.
okay.
Cool.
We have like a few more minutes.
Oh, wow. Right.
The next one.
Yeah. Thank you. So comfy too.
Exactly.
Thanks. I'm introducing you.
Yeah, we were doing all the chatting. Oh, I was gonna say you have a, that's great. You have a cool class.
Yeah. Right. I'm just gonna say. Okay. I'll turn it over to you. Okay.
We're already reporting everything.
Oh, okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. I just have a couple of quick announcements before we get started. I think Araceli emailed most of you there because of the schedule change. The evaluation from yesterday asked about Dr. Parra-Cardona, but Dr. Lozano is the one who presented. So I think she explained that you should treat it as the person who actually presented on that day, not the person on the survey. Okay, everyone got that? And if you haven't done yours, please open it and go ahead and do it now. Thank you. And then the other thing is that unfortunately, Araceli is not going to be able to make it in person this week. We do have a card in the back if anybody feels moved to express any gratitude. There's been a ton, I can't even describe how much planning effort she has put into this. I'm sure you've all received like 100 or more emails from her. So I wish she was here to like receive her acknowledgements. And if you would like to, we would love it if you would, just provide a note on her card. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning. Welcome to day 4 of the seminar. Like Audrey said, don't forget to take all your surveys, and also a reminder that we have the social today from 5 to 7 next door at the School of Nursing. I think we'll all be walking over together. This morning, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Ruben Parra-Cardona, who's Professor and Associate Dean for Global Engagement at the Steve Hicks School of Social Work. He also serves as Area Director for Research at the UT Austin Latino Research Institute. And as of August 1st, he will start a new position as the inaugural Nooe Endowed Chair at the College of Social Work at the University of Tennessee. He has been funded by NIMH and NIDA, and his research focuses on culturally adapted parenting interventions for Latino families with young and adolescent children. Dr. Parra-Cardona has extensive experience in cross-border research collaborations, including a large-scale initiative in Chile to disseminate a culturally adapted parenting program. He was recently invited as an expert co-author for a Parenting Intervention Handbook by the World Health Organization aimed at guiding international organizations and governments in selecting, designing, and evaluating, implementing, monitoring, and scaling up evidence-based parenting interventions. Today, he'll be speaking about cultural adaptation of evidence-based interventions, integrating social justice, culture, and scientific rigor.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure being here. I'm so happy to be here because I can be here. There's been something, I may be doing something right about this social justice journey because this spring I've had like 3 keynotes impacted by hurricanes, storms, and staying in airports. So it's like some sort of energy in the universe says, don't go, don't get there. And another energy says, yeah, get there. And so I want to say that's the reason you are seeing me today rather than yesterday. I was stuck in Austin because of Barry. So today is very important and very special to me. I'm not saying that because so you put that in the evaluation, but I truly say it for many things. The first one is I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to this extraordinary team, Charms team, everybody who has been involved. Because the last email you want to receive as an organizer is like, guess what? There's a hurricane, I may not make it. And the response of the team was wonderful. Nobody freaked out. Well, they're in Miami, right? So you're used to chaos related to hurricane and all that. You're like, okay, we'll adapt. And within 15 minutes, we had a game plan, and that was amazing. So my gratitude to the GRACE team for the problem solving, the flexibility, the no freaking out, and the problem solving strategies that work very, very well. So I'm very grateful about that. I'm very grateful for this institute. I was sharing with folks that when I started moving into implementation science, I applied to 3 of the leading institutes, having had 15 years of consecutive funding from NIH, and I was rejected every single time. And I was very concerned about inequities, right? And because who you train is who is gonna move on to implement science. And so I ended up getting my training in Canada with folks from the Implementation Science Institute in Canada, and then came back to the US in a way to get my first implementation science grant from NIDA. But the journey was a little bit tumultuous. So I'm very grateful for this institute because it's not only a training that you're getting. I was sharing with folks, you're addressing an inequity issue in training that has been historical and there continue to be challenges in the implementation of science fields in terms of addressing social justice and equity issues. So I'm very grateful for this institute. So this message is not only for organizers and the holders of this institute, but for all of you. You're part of addressing that historical inequity. So this is a 20-year, it's a fascinating 20-year journey. I don't want to talk only about research. I also want to talk about my journey. How many doctoral students do we have here? Okay, can you raise your hand? Yeah, it's okay, great. You're the best. You're the best. Yes. Yeah, they go with the hand like right? Postdocs? How about postdocs? Yes. There you go. There you go. In full circle, we have a wonderful training institute at UT Austin, and then just approached me and said, guess who went through your own institute? And I'm here. So it's a beautiful circle. Early career faculty. Okay, great, awesome. And I hear we have people from communities and administration positions. So it's a great mix. So I think I would like to also do this presentation with a message to all of you that we question ourselves when we get into a new field. I question myself a lot. I was already professor, tenure, 3 grants from NIH, but when I got into the implementation science field, I felt like such a loser because it's like, I don't understand anything. I feel overwhelmed. JD over there, we would have drinks in SPR and JD, I feel like a loser. No, you're not a loser. You're good. And by the way, JD, one of the giants in the field with the most humble heart. So thank you, JD, for all those bar conversations. They work as well as therapy sessions. But anyway, this message is also about the importance of not giving up on that journey. 20 years ago, I graduated from Texas Tech University. And as a family therapist, so very good clinical training and research. I adapted a parenting program for teen fathers in the justice system, but my mentor only had state funding, no NIH funding experience. I didn't know what even NIH meant. And he said, no, you need to go with the very best. So one of the things he did, he sponsored me in a way, and then at that time, the institute by Jose Chaposnik sponsored me the other half to come to Coral Gables. Actually, Coral Gables 20 years ago was the first National Hispanic Science Network conference I attended. And I was like, at that time, I still had a little bit of hair. So I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna lose my hair. And I ended up losing all the hair. Because I was so overwhelmed, so inspired, but so overwhelmed about these amazing funded programs of research. Everything was new to me, right? So that's what I appreciate our colleagues here so much, because I was in this first row saying, I will never get there. I will never get there. And I approached Jose Chaposnik, Willie Prado at the time. He was a postdoc, I think. Yeah. He keeps his hair, right? That's right. There's difference in maturity. But you know, we were like figuring out what to do with our lives. And I think it's the creating community that makes the whole difference. So part of my message is also, you know, 20 years after that, I see the trajectory and it's like, okay, it's been a good ride, but there's not only about the science, it's about the being and the community that you create and differentiating. And I'm gonna talk a lot about that differentiation. So it's gonna be a combination of that journey. It's a special day for me. It's bittersweet because it's the last time I'm gonna have a slide with the University of Texas at Austin. So the last message I wanna convey to you is that I love my community of scholars at UT Austin. It was a very difficult decision when I was approached by Tennessee with this opportunity. So the community of scholars is very hard, but being in Texas has been incredibly difficult, and we are in a historical battle. And we're at the time that there are active efforts to mental diversity. So today I'm going to talk about my journey, right? And how it's informed by social justice, community-based participatory research, not as a method, but as a set of principles in philosophy and advocacy. I'm going to talk about some of the work that we've done on healing through parenting. I had 2 near-death experiences. So my research is not only about interesting scientific stuff, it's about we're alive today. We don't know about tomorrow. We don't know about tonight. So it's like seizing the day as much as we can. So there's a spiritual journey as well. Then the implementation science journey, that's where you are going to hear about a lot of happy hour debriefing anecdotes. Because when I went to my first plenary, that there's over 150 models. I'm like, and then I'm going to talk about global reach, that it's very, very close to my heart. In terms of the use of terminology, you will hear me talking about Latino, Latinx. I use all the terms because I do a lot of global reach, global work. And just 2 months ago, I was in Chile, and the Chileans were like, so you came up with another term again? And how is it that now you're saying that should be the term Latine when we have not been even invited at the table to have a conversation about that? We're not Latinos, we're not Latine, we're Chileans. So that's why I use the terms in very relative ways. I would not be here without the community that brought me here. Is all the people in our program of research, starting with the parents that have guided us with their example, the community collaborators, the allies that we have in the community, mentors. And we were talking about that PIs are important because they get the grants, but without project managers, studies do not run at all. So it's like, I could not be here without all the people that have made a difference in this. And I know many times we see stories about National Institute of Health that is like, that is creating disparity, or only established groups are getting there. My experience has been wonderful, has been difficult, has been intense, but I have met amazing advocates in the National Institute of Health. We started with the National Institute of Mental Health, who supported our initial work on cultural adaptation, and for the past 10 years with the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Realizar una psicología de la liberación exige primero lograr una liberación de la psicología. Ignacio Martín Baró. I come from a traditional Mexican family. My dad was an engineer, very informed by patriarchal norms and expectations. When I told him I wanted to shift from finance, because I had a Fulbright in Tec de Monterrey, a very prestigious university in Mexico, I wanted to go to psychology. He said, okay, fine, it's your life. You're not my son anymore. I mean, he just kicked me out. And at that time, at 20, I didn't have anyone. So the Jesuits, they took me under their wing. The Jesuits in the Catholic Church are like, how can I say? Like, they belong to the church, but the Pope say is like, you just go away. Because they're so rebellious, they challenge all the norms and all that. But yeah, we're your children, don't deny us. And so they took me under the wing, and everything you will see here are from back of those years. I jumped in novitiate because I was homeless, right? So are you interested in exploring becoming a priest? Sure. I mean, I didn't have a home. Of course, I wasn't going to explore everything. I told them about my situation, and they said, no, yeah, join. And it was like the best year of my life, because when they explained everything about priesthood, I was like, no, I don't think I can go that way. But I want to be an advocate, I want to be an ally. And a lot of what you will see comes from my years of liberation theology, the movements of the Salvadorian Civil War. Ignacio Martín Baró.
Accessibility show.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. No. We can adapt. I always say that around that story, something happens. It's like, yeah, it's in the universe. I know, Ignacio, I'm talking about you. And Ignacio Martín Baró, along with other 3 Jesuits, were assassinated in El Salvador. And he was an extraordinary sociologist, graduate from the University of Chicago. And whenever the Salvadorian government said, we're progressing on human rights and all that, with his science, he would do field studies and would demonstrate that, no, actually, violations were happening. He would filter all the information to the United Nations. Human Rights Watch, and eventually created a lot of pressure for the US government to stop sending weapons to the Salvadorian government, which the government was using to engage in very deep human rights violations. So he talks about the fact that doing science is a very serious business because science can be another instrument, very sophisticated instrument to perpetuate the status quo. Just think about IDCs, and I love educational systems in the US. The US has given me a life that I would not have in Mexico, but just the structure of IDCs, how much you pay for one course buyout and how much you pay the person teaching that course for you, it's a disparity, right? And those are structural issues. I am part of the system. I benefit from the system and I need to be accountable for that. So it's a permanent struggle, right? So those are the struggles that if we really, 5 p.m. happy hour, we engage in these conversations, it's like, these realities are hard to absorb and accept, but also I have a family, I need to pay mortgages, I need to get my kids to college. So those are the realities we coexist. Those years at Iteso University with Jesuit education really marked my life because they pounded on us in terms of the privilege that you have. What are you gonna do with that? Right now we are here, we have our coffees, we're juiced, where so many of our brothers and sisters are out there in Texas, for example, in the heat of 110, changing routes. So what is the difference? Yeah, we've had our journey, we've done our decisions, but the issue of privilege is very clear. So a lot of what you will see about my program of research is about contending with these issues. So to liberate psychology, to implement a psychology of liberation, you need to liberate psychology from itself. The way I use it for myself is to implement a science of liberation, you need to liberate science from itself. If you don't question your scientific paradigms, if you don't question your scientific models, we're at high risk of following in a structure that will perpetuate the status quo. I love democracy. I love a free market. And so you see this with a reddish tone. So I'm a mix of things. But in terms of science, it's been very important for me in every single study. How does this apply to this principle of Martin Baró, which goes at the core of social justice, right? Because social justice is tricky because it's a narrative that is well accepted, but it's a narrative that is very difficult to live. So why cultural adaptation? Why cultural adaptation? I was born and raised in Chihuahua, which is 4 hours south of El Paso, Texas. So in Chihuahua and Ciudad Juárez, you see all the maquiladoras, all the manufacturing companies from the US, right? Using Nike, Champion, Ford, Chevrolet, and all that. So I grew up seeing that. And for example, we had assembled motors from engines for Ford. Chances are when you start the car, the cables that go from the ignition to the engine were assembled in that northern corridor. A worker in Mexico in a maquiladora makes $8 per day. So that was my reality. So there was always a struggle with the US in terms of that sense of imperialism. It's complicated because with the history of corruption in Mexico, and we need to talk about that, there was these conditions in which the United States comes and says, I'm going to put a factory here. I'm going to pay your workers $8 per day. I'm going to maximize profit, minimize cost. And the Mexican government, yes, I need you. And the Mexican laws allow for that. So it's very complex coexistence. But growing up with that, we have a phrase in Mexico that says, La maquila aniquila, the maquiladora kills you. And I had friends going through the maquiladora industry with careers, and by 40s, they were done in terms of the exhaustion that they were experiencing. So I was very conflicted growing up in the border about the idea of taking an intervention developed in the United States for parenting in Northern Oregon with primarily non-Latino white folks, and being tested there and adapting that for Latino populations, right? And as I was mentioning to you, when I was an exchange student here, I remember the history class when they said, well, territory annexed by Mexico, the territory ceded by Mexico. It was not annexed, it was not ceded. It was an invasion at that time. Again, systemic histories, we need to know about the history of Mexico and all that, all the way back there. But what you see there, it's a picture of what Ciudad Juarez looks like today in those communities where the maquiladora workers still work. I do a lot of work in Ciudad Juarez. I don't report a lot of that to my university because they would freak out. But I just go and, I mind my ways. I was the state coordinator for the anti-trafficking program. So I know people in the state police, federal police. And it pains me that every year that I go back and I go to those communities where those workers live, continue to look like that. And that's pretty much one of the corridors in the maquiladora industry. So imagine a shift there, 9-10 hours. You are just exhausted at the end of it. So why cultural adaptation? My dissertation was the cultural adaptation of parenting program, evidence-based parenting program for Latino teen fathers in the justice system. So why cultural adaptation if you're so conflicted about the US? The first reason is I was a family therapist in a juvenile center. I was subpoenaed 15 times for trials. 14 of those was to represent Black or brown kids with public defendants, with relatively some major offenses, some minor offenses, like minor offenses, smoking a joint at school. Everybody served jail time, every one of those kids. When I represented the only non-Latino white adolescent who had a private attorney, he was given 3-month probation for a serious offense. And at that time, I knew parenting is it's a powerful way to try to prevent our kids from entering the system. Because once you enter the system, when you look at the inequities and the structural racism, it has continued to improve, but very slowly. It can be very difficult to get out of there. So parenting was, for me, we need to look into parenting. And as I was conflicted, Mary Forgatch and Gary Patterson, my parenting mentors of the Oregon Social Learning Center, presented this slide in the Family Research Consortium funded by National Institute of Mental Health at the time that congregated best parenting researchers. And what you see here, it's a prevention trial. These families were with kids ages 4 through 12. They participated in a 12-week parenting program, 12 weeks only, no booster sessions. They were exposed to the parenting program, and the intervention group was exposed to a manualized parenting program in a group setting, and the control group was referred to services as usual. What was amazing about this, NIMH funded not only the trial, but a follow-up. So what you see here, after a 12-week parenting program, look at what happens. These kids are 4 to 12. After 9 years, look at the trajectories of probability of arrest. For those kids whose parents participated in the parenting program, the probability of ending up in the justice system is very low compared to those children whose parents did not participate in the parenting program. So the protective factor, I was like, oh my gosh. I was working at this end of the continuum with kids who were in their teens and they were trafficking drugs, they were engaged in serious offenses, and serious offenses plus a system in which structural racism is embedded. It's like once in the system, it's very hard to get out of the system. And that's what I said, for as much as I twist my head with the idea of cultural adaptation, as a scientist, I need to go that route because we need to try and see if this works for our people. My parenting mentors, Jerry Patterson and Maren Forgatch, a lot of what you hear about all the parenting interventions nowadays, Triple P, Incredible Years, Mindy's Unidas, Austin, they really draw a lot of the theoretical principles stemming from the empirical research of Jerry Patterson in behavioral research about what works in family, what works in parenting. So that's when I took the prevention route. I said, okay, I'm going to engage in the prevention route. And it's a delicate balance between social justice, science, and culture, right? Sometimes we get the culture right, and then we look at the science and be like, oops, we are overlooking this. Sometimes we get too focused on the science and we're overlooking social justice. So it's always a process of balancing that. So 3 phases of my journey. The first phase starts in Detroit. I didn't know if I was gonna make it. I was a doctoral student. I presented on my dissertation, and that's when I was recruited to Michigan State. And they were like, "Are you looking for a job?" And like, I said, "Now, yes." And but then my immigration journey started, right? Because I needed a sponsor. So I did not only need an employer, but I needed, it's gonna sound brutal, but that's the way it is in the eyes of immigration. I need a university to own me in a way, so they would own my immigration case and would sponsor me. So that journey to become, from when I started to become permanent resident, lasted 10 years. I can tell you more about those 10 years at happy hour because I will leave the drink. But for those of you, so you don't get discouraged, it can happen. But that's when my journey started. And I love this picture because I started at Michigan State when Detroit was in bankruptcy. What you see at the back is like the sad story, right? It, like those years in which you would drive through Detroit and say, "Oh my gosh." But always, always, always in the Latino community, you would see that sense of resilience that mural and those beautiful colors represent. So as an immigrant, I'm pursuing a dream, right? My dad was in a very conflicted relationship with him. It has a good ending, the story. Remind me to tell you before I forget the lecture so you don't get discouraged on that. Yeah, it was a beautiful ending. Well, a beautiful second phase. There's no ending. And I always wanted to pursue a dream, right? Because I only wanted to use my resources to provide for my family, particularly because, you know, I was the state coordinator in Mexico for children in the streets, and I had to interact with the cartels. I received threats from the cartels when we were implementing programs in the community, because we were a group like this is a threat to the cartel because we're a source of information. So whenever I organize like trainings, groups, and all that, I would receive threats. I saw the kids in survival mode. So I was very motivated to find a way in which I could contribute. And why is the immigrant narrative so important to me? Because so much of what we have in these beautiful countries, thanks to our people who live in the shadows. You know, we look at our houses, we look at our roads, we look at our food. During COVID, we kept receiving food and vegetables while our people were getting infected. And these are stories that go silent, right? And particularly in political times, immigrants become the focus of narratives of hate. So living in the shadows is something that I have seen my people experiencing. And when I started getting into this realm, I was like, okay, how do I do it in a way that I honor their stories, but I adhere to science as well? So we conducted a 2-year qualitative study in Detroit. That's when whatever hair I had left started to go, because I was doing that along with my first NIDA application. That's it. And that study helped us to understand the life experiences, because I said, okay, we're gonna adapt. But like in therapy, you cannot intervene without really understanding the life stories of family. So like in therapy, 1-2 sessions is just joining with the storyline. We need to join with the storyline of families. So we'll learn in depth about the stories of adversity. We'll learn in depth about parenting challenges and their parenting needs. And not only we'll learn from them, but that 2 years of qualitative work help us create really strong alliances with the community. Community leaders would sit with me for hours and say, so are you a helicopter researcher or a community researcher? What do you need for tenure? How many publications do they ask you? How many grants do they? Because we have all those people from the Blue University. I forget to say the name. That's what they say, okay? I'm a Spartan, so we have an issue with University. So, but both universities were guilty of that. And because both of universities have used us. So how do we know you're not gonna use this again? So those very honest and frank conversations. So that 2 years was not only about learning from the community, but really having those tough conversations with communities. And this is an example of just how powerful those conversations with communities were, because when I asked this father, how it's like to experience discrimination as an undocumented immigrant, he said, discrimination is a bitter drink that you need to swallow. You have to swallow it, because you say, if I get rebellious or do not behave, they can throw me into jail or they won't help me. So you just have to swallow that thing. It took this father 15 minutes to say this phrase because he was choking. And this father in one of the groups was the best spiritual guide I had in my journey because I said, well, in overcoming resilience, in overcoming this adversity, he said, stop saying overcoming. I'm not gonna overcome. I will never be a permanent resident. My kids are born here. I know I cannot go back to Mexico to see my parents because if I go back, I may not make it back. Can you just say we're learning how to live with this, coping with this? And it was like, oh, you're one of those guides in your journey that if you pay attention, you hear the message that they are conveying. So yes, that's why I'm grateful to all the guides that we've had in this journey. And I'm very grateful to this powerful guide in my journey. And at the same time, parents talk about their conflicts, right? As immigrants, our children have lived all their lives here and we want to educate them like we were raised. We live in two cultures and we need to find a way to keep both cultures as we raise our kids, right? And so they were talking about the source of cultural conflicts, but also the sense of resilience. Latino values is to instill in your children to be respectful of others. It goes in the blood, what your parents teach. And that sense of resilience is just beautiful. When we replaced the roof in Austin, we had to replace it in the summer because it started to leak and I'm like, oh. So I called the roof company and I said, I gathered my kids and I said, you're gonna see, there's gonna be a non-Latino white guy that is gonna come. Yeah, white and guy. He's like, we're gonna talk about gender, we're gonna talk about race. And he's gonna come, he's gonna negotiate the price with me, he's gonna give me a booklet and all that, blah, 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 narrative, do. And then we're not gonna negotiate. And then when the crew to replace the building comes, it's gonna be all Latinos. And one of them is gonna be very fluent in English and the rest will not. And they were like, what? Like, no, you work in the community. So just as I said, the contractor comes, a big old truck, right? Texas style, boom, boom. Ah, the white guy is here. Okay, so they were sitting in the kitchen and just like, don't know what's happening, but they were observing everything. And he goes on with the speech and all that, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay. And then he pulls the, the credit card. We do everything, okay. Like, 50% you're accurate. Oh, wait until. And then the crew comes, and of course, all Latinos, right? And the Latino who speaks is the chief of the crew. The others in the background, like watching, like, what's this dude? Where's he from? Like, a reading system. Anyway, the crew goes to the roof, 110 degrees. What's the first thing they do up on the roof? They turn on the radio. Boom, boom, boom. Ay, ¿qué pasó, manito? Mira la manito, mira un besito. And they were laughing, singing the whole morning, 110. And we went and got them Subways and Gatorades and all that, and they had their break. They went up, they got the roof replaced like never 8 hours, and they never complained. And at the end of the day, I went down, I started speaking Spanish, and they were like, oh, habla español. And then said, my daughters just wanted to thank you because you are so joyful and all that, and you are really inspiring. And the most beautiful conversation happened because they started to talk about their stories. We didn't have to ask immigration status. It was clear the struggle that they had. So when we went back in, my 20-year-old just had tears and said, I was not aware of how privileged I am. And I cannot believe how happy I am. I am complaining here that I don't have a car as a sophomore. She was at the time sophomore in high school. And I was bitching about you because you didn't want to give me a car because I said, wait until your senior year. And thank you for not doing that because now I see that. So in our program of research, I think we hear these very heartbreaking stories about adversity. 95% of the families we work with are undocumented. Many of them haven't seen their families of origin in 15, 20 years. But despite of all that adversity, this is what you have. Latino values is to instill in your children to be respectful of others. It goes in the blood. So it's the respeto, the optimism, the moving forward that is very inspiring. Just want to make sure how I'm doing with time. I can present until 10. And okay, great, perfect. Yeah, because you know I like to talk, so. Okay. Okay, so in figuring out our program of research, right? Knowing that, okay, that's the population, that crew is the population I want to serve. In the roads, in the fields, in construction, how do we make it safe? So as part of that community engagement, I realized that doing that in community centers would be risky because we had immigration rates in schools. We had immigration rates in community centers, but part of my community organizing was reach out. So I reached out to Homeland Security and I started to have some good conversations and alliances. I cannot give you more details. That's happy hour conversation. But it's part of the networking, right? And they said, look at the gentleman's agreement. And it's a horrible term that we're reading. So it's an agreement in law enforcement that in faith-based organizations, you do not activate protocols. And it's not law, but it's an agreement. And that's when I realized, oh, we need to implement our program of research in churches because that's the safest place. So what you see on the left is the Holy Redeemer in Detroit, and on the right is San Jose in Austin. And faith-based organizations has been strategic in so many ways. First, to protect families. Second, because it's also many times places that families identify as trustworthy. And many times that's where you get free immigration services. So we have implemented in faith-based organizations for the past 15 years. This is in the basement of Holy Redeemer. It was like my years in Mexico. It was so cool. It was like, because families would get dropped off at 6:45 at the front of the church like they were going to mass. And there was a little tunnel. And then the tunnel would get them all the way to the back of the church. And what you see in that picture is the basement where we would run the parenting groups. And at the end of the group at 9 p.m., we would get them out through the parking lot that is gated for the priests. That's where they would be picked up. And we did that for 10 years, not a single arrest. Yes. And so it's that strategic in terms of how to do that, but also how to create that sense of community. That's a graduation. So it's our 11-week parenting group. And the first time we had a graduation, because we have diplomas, we have medals, and the kids give the medal and the diploma to the parent, right? So in the first graduation ceremony, one of the mothers comes down with a night dress and, wow, you have a busy night, you have graduation here and something else. Oh, no, this is it. Oh, and I'm dressed like this because this is the only graduation I will have. Oh, you can imagine. So this is a typical night of graduation with the kids, with the family, very, very meaningful moments in our lives. So at the time was, how do we get funded on a cultural adaptation study to demonstrate that cultural adaptation is relevant? So for all the docs too, postdocs, early career, how many have been not discussed in a grant application or not funded on the first grant application? Okay, there you go. I know, I hear you, right? Yeah, we've been there. So my first experience was horrible because I was not discussed. We titled the application PMTO for Latinos. We were just massive. Like an atomic bomb happening in the application. Right? And yeah, they had a number of good observations, but one reviewer hated us, and like, I don't know what you want for that. We're doing parenting programs in Joseph's originally developed, and kids who are brown, black, white, all of them benefit. Ultimately, how do you know culture is important? How do you know culture is important? At that time, I'm like, what? You don't have the courage to put your name. You know, so what do you do when you get a feedback like that? Put that paper in the drawer, call JD or other friend that you have, go for a happy hour, get tipsy, swear, go to bed, and then the next morning with coffee, you strategize again. So I persisted until the division director of the National Institute of Mental Health accepted to meet with me, and I was like, this is unacceptable, this is a racist, this is eccentric, this is blah, 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 blah. And he was like, super cool, Joe Sherrill. He was amazing. And it's like, I hear you, I understand you. Are you done with your argument? Like, kind of. And you're not gonna get through like that because sit in my desk. I receive applications for cultural adaptation 20 every week. I am not CDC, I'm not SANSA, I'm not funding service, I'm funding science. So I agree with you. We will not invite again. That review was completely inappropriate. But you're not gonna get funded from NIH without presenting a case, a scientific case that can address social justice. So that's your charge. Regulate your anger. I understand it, but channel it in a way that can help us create a model of adaptation that other folks can use, not only those working with Latinos. They were like, oh, okay, I can work with this. I can work with this, okay? So you get away from happy hour for 3 months and you only do coffees with friends, focus on science. And one day I wonder, how do we demonstrate people can cultural adaptation? And running, I came across a TV commercial like this. And I saw that's what we need. We need a differential design. So in order to demonstrate the relevance of cultural adaptation, we need to do minimal cultural adaptation, in-depth cultural adaptation in a control group, and we'll compare and contrast. Of course, I was freaking out, right? Because with a design like that, I was like, if we show no differences at all, it's like shooting ourselves in the feet for the cost, because a reviewer can say, see, there's no need for cultural adaptation. But if we show something relevant, that's also that's a contribution to the cost, right? So it was a challenging journey because this is our design. So we propose a randomized controlled trial in which we would allocate families to 3 conditions: superficial, surface level adaptation, not superficial, surface level adaptation, that we adapted the original PM2 intervention according to language, metaphors, so Latino metaphors, the images and manuals, but it was strictly focused on parenting. That adaptation was conducted by Melanie Domenech Rodriguez in Utah, so we just adapted that with idioms and expressions for Latino immigrants in Detroit. The second version, the second arm of the study was a deep structure adaptation. In that adaptation, all the knowledge we learned in those 2 years of cultural adaptation, we embedded those in content and method of delivery. So for example, in being a Latino immigrant parent, we included topics, themes and theories such as critical race theory, which by the way is banned in Texas public schools. And I can say it. It's included there. You hear me? In session 1, because it's like we talk with parents, what happened to you is racism. Racism is real. And you know what happens with racism? You internalize it and you think what's wrong about me rather than saying what's wrong about you, that you are on the basis of the color of the skin discriminating against me. So we set the frame for that. We talk about what it's like being an undocumented immigrant without saying the word undocumented, but first generation immigrant. And then we go through the intervention. And as you see, for example, in setting limits, when we get to that session, our intervention is a lot about role plays, right? So let's say we have a situation in which the kid threw the toys and you say, Rubencito, please pick up the toys. I don't want to. So you're gonna get into a limit setting situation, potentially timeout situation, privilege removal. In the first intervention, we would only go to the school right away. In the second intervention, we would say, wait, before we go there, tell me about your day, Ruben. And then Ruben would say, well, I got to Home Depot at 6 in the morning because that's a pickup spot, right? I don't have papers. So you have to fight for attention. If you're lucky, you get picked up that day. You work for 10 hours, and then in those 10 hours, they're calling you the wetback. What are you doing here? Mexican, what's up with you? And then at the end of the day, comes the employer and says, here's your pay. And then you count the money and you say, I worked 10 hours and you're paying me 6. And then he says, you want me to choose you tomorrow? You want to take the 6 or what the F? And then that is completely unregulated at that moment, right? Dysregulated at that moment. So in that intervention, we provide a lot of mindfulness, grounding, as we pair injustice and oppression experienced in an outer context to the family context. So it's not only the way that we talk about discrimination, but then as we deliver parenting components, we see how discrimination is impacting the parenting practices. And that's when we learned we also could not limit ourselves to deliver interventions. We had to pair each family with an advocate. So that's when, on the run, as we were doing it, I started pairing each family with a social worker. So we would do a needs assessment. Do you have a roof? Do you have food? Are you being discriminated in your workplace? Let's find another place that does not have the discriminatory practices that you are experiencing. These are the findings that propel us to the national conversation at the time, because they demonstrated the impact of doing that. In this graph, what you see, the line that goes black here, that's our control group. The other two lines are the cultural adaptive parenting programs, and the outcome is parenting skills. So what we see is no matter to which group you're allocated, your parenting skills improve. That's good news, because if you cannot have the resources and time to do a deep structural adaptation, parents are going to benefit. But this graph was particularly important because in that one you see all internalizing and externalizing symptoms in children in the expanded group, in the enhanced group, deep structure, significantly improved, slope is going down, compared to the adapted group's surface level adaptation and compared to control. So mental health significantly improved much more when you overtly address discrimination in the parenting program and when you deliver the intervention by being responsive to that outer context discrimination. When we went back to parents, because all our studies are mixed methods, we do the quantitative, we do the qualitative. That's an HLN study, because I really wanted to make it as exhaustive as possible. So in our formulas, perfect. In our formulas, we include time of enrollment, time of assessments, because I knew we were going to be questioned, so I didn't want to be discredited. And I said, this data is going to be, can be turned against us if we are not super rigorous. So I had an amazing data analyst. And when we go to parents to help us understand that slope, we say, you know, we see that the kids in the parenting programs where you participated, that we talk about what it's like to be discriminated against, they do better than the groups where we don't. And he said, well, that's easy. I get discriminated at work. I get frustrated. I want to yell. I cannot yell. I am angry. I want to control. I cannot control. I get home. I have control over everything. I control my wife because I'm the income earner. I control my kids because they need to obey me. And you know, I feel powerful and it feels good. But then I overuse my power and I feel like crap because I say, why am I doing this to my kids? And that was a constant narrative in the qualitative interviews. How, when you experience oppression, in those one of the most difficult conversations, when you experience oppression, how is it that you can become an oppressor in another context? And it's very important. We many times talk about the ways in which we are oppressed, but we need to talk about the ways in which oppression can really permeate in other ways. Afuera me siento sin poder, pero en mi casa tengo el poder. Outside, I don't have power, but inside, I have power. And women who were inside home, they were also saying the same thing. He uses the money. He tells me how we're going to use the money. I depend on him for that. He has contact with the outer context. I don't. I am isolated. I haven't talked with my family, but guess what? At least I have control over my kids. So those conversations were very powerful and really help us understand the dynamics of oppression. As a result of that, the National Institute on Drug Abuse was very interested in an approach to cultural adaptation. They invited us to adapt for adolescent families. And we adapted the intervention for children, the adolescent families. The first study were families with children ages 4 through 12. And that study started the day Trump was elected. I was in Tijuana, I remember so well. it took me like 5 hours to cross the border because they closed the border, like they turn off the lights and immigration officers walk around cars with AK-47s and all that. The moment he was elected, we won. And I'm like, oh my God, I saw everything that happened during those 4 years. And we were exposed to some of the most aggressive persecutorial activities by Homeland Security. And I will never forget, we called everybody we have recruited. It's like, imagine this room full of people with parents. And I said, it's going to be very difficult 4 years. Some of you who are sitting here will not be sitting here 4 years. It's a reality, and we cannot lie to you. I wish I did not say that, but it's very likely that it's going to happen. We have all the immigration attorneys outside of the room because we have everybody outside of the room. They will help you with your case. But if you want to withdraw from the study, it's completely okay. What it matters the most is you and your family. And I will never forget this mom that stood up, tall Latina from the north. Well, not this guy, not anyone is going to prevent me from being in this group. I've been waiting for this group for 18 months, and I want to be the best man I can be. If we have an immigration break, we're going to give you a call and say, can we reschedule our parenting session for next week? But we are not. It's the most impactful expression of resilience that I see. It ended up being a very successful study. We had a high retention rate of 87%. We had a similar effects than the other study that I presented to you. And we saw new experiences of oppression that we had not seen here before. My son was bullied by a classmate at school because I'm an immigrant. It got to the point of him saying that he wanted to die. We started to see suicidal narratives out of immigration-related bullying at school. We suffer by being immigrants, but our children suffer even more. When we talk about this, my son tells me, Mom, I know you came here to offer us a better future. So this theme of discrimination has continued to evolve. And now we're funded by NIDA to implement a implementation science trial in Austin. And the theme of discrimination continues to be there. The discrimination in Austin is different. And unfortunately, some of the discrimination we are seeing is by Latino employers in Austin. But it's a theme that we continue to grapple with. But at the same time, we continue to see resilience. After talking with my daughter about immigration, she told me, Mom, I'm going to be a social worker when I grow up. There are too many injustices against Latinos in this country. I want to help. So I'm starting to close this presentation with the main messages because the first message I want to convey is that I had not gone into these 2 trials without differentiating. Because when I was doing cultural adaptation, Mary and Jerry were freaking out about cultural adaptation because they had their beautiful trial. And they said, what if you adapt and it doesn't show that continuity? And I said, that's science. So I had to flew to Oregon, and I had a half-day session with them, showing them qualitative data about the life experience of Latinos. And they said, oh, we completely understand. You have to do cultural adaptation. But then some of my Latino colleagues at that time said, why are you doing cultural adaptation? Do you want to be white? So I was like struggling with the fidelity folks and struggling with the cultural adaptation folks. So I had to come in the middle and differentiate. So some of the take-home messages I would like to say is in this journey, it's easy to feel intimidated by the structure. It's easy to feel intimidated by those folks who are already funded, who are our friends and our colleagues, but it's like the system is already there. But it's so important for us to find our journey and to differentiate, to forge those alliances, and through rigorous science, but adhering to social justice principle, find a way. In family therapy, there's a beautiful theory called Bowen's family systems, in which basically states that whenever there's conflict, the way to work through conflict is not cutting off. It's differentiating and adhering to your identity. And if you have a conflict with your dad, have one-on-ones with him. If you have a conflict with your mom or a great-grandparent, have one-on-ones. Never give up on a relationship. Doesn't mean that you need to love or be always in a relationship, but never cut off and always differentiate. So I have used that principle for myself in my program of research, and it's been a beautiful journey. So chapter 2 of that, of my program of research, I over-prepare. I can go on this over Q&A because it's more anyone that has an interest in the clinical process of change, let me know about that. Before I finish, I have like 5 minutes, right? You can tell I'm very flexible with my time. Okay, let me emphasize the 2 last messages. Where? I don't know what it is. That one? Yeah. Okay. Great. So basically this one is what informs our first session because part of what I was talking about in the beginning, my concern was we cannot only do a parenting program, we need to contextualize a parenting program within a structure in which we will be implemented in a nation was founded by racism and slavery. And we're not done with that. It continues, it evolves, but it continues. We have made progress. But again, with Ignacio Martin Baró, if we overlook that, we would be perpetuating injustice. So critical race theory, we use it in a way that first we talk about racism with parents. That is real, because the majority of parents in our groups, unfortunately, they come with internalized narratives of racism. Well, it's because we're Latinos, we're not able to assume with them, we don't have the same brains, and we say that's what racism does. I mean, but do they tolerate the 110 degrees in the roof? No, they need you. And that's the way this country works. So it's like externalizing the symptom and externalizing oppression. That's the way we use critical race theory. And then how can they have those conversations with kids? So in the deep structural adaptation, that's what we do. So that's at the level of content, but we like to talk about the advocacy piece, because in the advocacy piece, and I'm gonna close with these 2. In the advocacy piece, we received a call from a mom who said, I just got my deportation notice. And I immediately contacted the attorney and said, can we file something like a hardship for a US citizen? Because this is a family with a US citizen kid. So we file along with the attorney team a motion to stop the deportation based on the premises that this mother was the only person in that immediate network of that kid that had been exposed to a parenting program on evidence-based principles. And if we remove that person, we would bring hardship to that kid. And fingers crossed. So it went. A month after that, we got a call from mom. She was crying and saying, and I'm like, oh boy. And she said, just want to tell you, the deportation motion was stopped. And I was put in track for refugee status and permanent resident status. I have not received an R1 so far, only the R34s. And I'll tell you more about that. But I cannot tell you, I know I'm going to be happy when I get that, in the future. Getting that call and knowing we were able to contribute in that way has been the milestone of my career. Because then it created a network among parenting researchers that we share resources with legal teams to work in that direction. And I never saw myself in that direction, but through good science, but getting out of our comfort zone of the parenting research and what we were told we had to do. Nobody told us you had to engage in that level of advocacy, but we did it and we were proactive. We were able to offer a beautiful, beautiful story and hope for that family. So I would like to close by saying, now we're moving into implementation science, and I can talk more about how is it that we're grounding that, because we're realizing that the way we implemented in Michigan was very different from the way we implemented in Austin. But I would say that at the core of what we're doing is we are just not letting go of that social justice mandate. And even with implementation science frameworks, we are trying to see how is it that frameworks address issues of social justice, they don't address issues of social justice, or how is it that we can use implementation science frameworks to address social justice issues? But there's a lot to be done in that realm. And my final message is each of you are changing lives one day at a time. And the fact that you're here today, it gives me so much hope because I cannot wait to see the work that is gonna come out of this group. The work that is already coming out of this group, but particularly the new work, invigorating work that is gonna come out of this group because we need each other. We need each other in this journey. There are folks right now in the state of Texas that cannot mention the word diversity, equity, and inclusion without fear of losing their jobs. The folks at UT Austin who lost their jobs in one single day because of that. So we are in the midst of it, and we need all of you. And the fact that you are here is not random. You're brilliant. Your credentials, your hard work have given you this seat that we have. And because of that and how extraordinary you are, I'm asking you, let's continue this journey together because there's a lot to be done. People are waiting for us, and they are waiting for us to stand that hand and make a difference in their lives. You will get the NOAs, you will get the publications, but this is the most important part of it. So with that, I would like to close, and we have a few minutes for Q&A.